Imagine two people, same city, same education, same starting salary. 10 years later, one owns property, builds passive income, and sleeps soundly. The other is deeper in debt, working harder than ever, and cannot explain why. The difference was not intelligence, it was not luck, it was not even discipline. It was something quieter, something almost invisible, a mistake so deeply buried in the architecture of the human mind that most people will never find it, let alone fix it. And the most haunting part? The very mistake that destroyed one person's financial future was, for the other, the most beautiful accident they ever stumbled into. This is the story of a psychological discovery that began not in a boardroom or a bank, but in a university laboratory in the 1960s. A discovery that, decades later, neuroscientists, behavioral economists, and some of the world's most ruthless financial minds have quietly confirmed changes everything about how wealth is built and why most people never build it. In 1967, social psychologist Daryl Bem proposed a theory so counterintuitive it threatened to overturn everything psychology thought it knew about the human mind. The conventional wisdom had always been simple. Your beliefs shape your behavior. You think a certain way, therefore you act a certain way. Bem looked at the evidence and said the opposite was true. He proposed that individuals infer their own attitudes, emotions, and internal states by observing their own behaviors, much like an external observer would, particularly when internal cues are weak or ambiguous. In other words, we do not act because of who we believe we are. We believe we are who we are because of how we watch ourselves act. Image.iresearch.net. Think about what that means for money. A child grows up in a house where the phrase, "we can't afford that," is spoken like a prayer. They watch themselves not have things. They watch themselves avoid risks. They watch themselves flinch at opportunity. And slowly, without any conscious decision, they begin to form a conclusion about who they are, not based on destiny, not based on genetics, but on the accumulated evidence of their own behavior. They become, in the deepest psychological sense, someone who does not have money, not someone who temporarily lacks money, someone whose identity has merged with the condition of lack. And once that merge happens, the mistake is complete. Researchers have found that a scarcity mindset is likely to both contribute to and result from impaired cognitive functioning, a causal loop where poverty-related concerns create higher levels of stress and constant preoccupation, which depletes mental resources and reinforces financial avoidance. The trap feeds itself. Researchers Sendil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir found that scarcity imposes a mental tax, constantly capturing attention and reducing cognitive bandwidth, brain power that would otherwise go toward planning ahead and problem solving. The person who most needs to think clearly about money is the very person whose mind has been hijacked by the weight of not having it. They are not failing because they are weak. They are failing because their self-perception has become a cage, and they built it themselves, one behavior at a time, without ever realizing it. Science Direct. This is the beautiful mistake, not the poverty, not the debt, the identity. And here is where it gets extraordinary. Researchers at Arizona State University found in 2024 that differences in individuals' financial resources may be instrumental to understanding how continuously people perceive themselves over time, both from past to present and present to future. People from financially disadvantaged backgrounds do not just perceive themselves as currently poor, they perceive their future selves as continuous with that condition. The future self and the struggling present self become the same person, indistinguishable, inseparable, and so the future never arrives differently, because inside the mind it already happened the only way it could. NIH. For centuries, philosophers sensed this truth without the language to name it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. James Allen, in the early 20th century, wrote that a man's mind is like a garden. It grows whatever is planted, deliberately or by neglect. Napoleon Hill spent 20 years interviewing the wealthiest people in America and kept arriving at the same conclusion. Before the money comes, there is a self that believes it belongs there. But none of these men had the brain scans. None of them had the data. They were writing from intuition, from observation, from the pattern recognition of genius, and they were right. Now science has caught up, and what it found is almost too strange to believe. If you've been watching yourself struggle, you've been accidentally teaching yourself who you are. Every time you said, "I can't afford this," instead of, "How do I make this possible?" you handed your brain another data point. Every time you avoided looking at your bank account, every time you bought something small to feel momentarily whole, every time you dismissed an investment idea as not for someone like you, your brain was watching. Self-perception theory shows that we interpret our own actions the way we interpret others' actions, and our actions are often socially influenced and not produced out of our own free will, as we might expect. The behavior came first, the identity followed, and now the identity is running the show. Learning theories. But here's the thing about a mistake. It can be reversed, and when it reverses everything. If you're watching this and feeling something shift in your chest, that discomfort is the beginning. Subscribe, because what comes next in this channel is the mechanism of that reversal, and the window to use it is closing faster than most people know. A landmark study published in 2025, drawing on data from 60,168 individuals across 13 years of UK household economics, found that social identities, our sense of self based on group memberships, profoundly influence economic behavior, including capital market participation, a key driver of economic inequality. The people who saw themselves as investors participated in markets. The people who didn't. Not because of knowledge, not because of money, because of who they believed they were. NIH. And then came 2024, and artificial intelligence began its quiet, catastrophic restructuring of the global economy. By 2027, according to economists and labor analysts, the distinction between those who adapt and those who are displaced will not be education, it will not be location, it will be something far more intimate, who someone believes they are in relation to value creation. Those who see themselves as builders, as owners, as people whose ideas are worth something, they will find themselves positioned inside the new economy. Those still locked in an identity of labor, of waiting, of scarcity, they will find the ground shifting beneath them in ways no paycheck can stabilize. Researchers studying the intersection of mental health and the age of artificial intelligence warn that the erosion of labor market opportunities could deepen the existing struggle for a sense of purpose and identity that work provides, increasing anxiety, depression, and self-doubt. The psychological stakes have never been higher. The identity crisis is not coming, it is already here. Science Direct. But here's what the research also shows, and this is the part that doomsayers always miss. Perceptual psychological factors about individual finances may be more important to life satisfaction than the actual financial matters themselves. The perception shifts before the reality does, always. The brain must first accept a new story before it begins accumulating evidence to confirm it. This is not motivation speech. This is Bem's theorem applied to money. The behavior you choose today, even a single small act of a person who manages wealth, will be observed by your own mind and filed as evidence of who you are becoming. Financial Planning Association. Open the account, make the investment, however small, track the net worth number even when it hurts, not because the numbers matter yet, because your brain is watching, and every action is a vote for a new identity. Managing money is a skill. Skills are learnable. Identity is not fixed. personal one. The mistake was never being poor. The mistake was accepting it as a permanent description of the self. And the beautiful part, the part that makes this discovery worth everything, is that the same mechanism that built the trap also builds the exit. You've been using your behavior to write a story about yourself. The story can change. The pen is already in your hand. By 2027, two economies will exist side by side. Same world, same internet, same opportunities. One populated by people who made the shift, one by people who never found out they needed to. The line between them is not drawn in bank statements. It is drawn in the quiet, private story a person tells themselves about what kind of person they are. The question is not whether the shift is possible. The science settled that decades ago. The question is
whether you recognize that you have been making the mistake, and whether you decide today that the most important thing you will ever change is not your income, not your job, not your city, but the way you see yourself in the mirror when nobody else is watching. Because wealth was never hiding in the market. It was never hiding in a strategy. It was hiding in a misperception so old, so quiet, so perfectly disguised as truth that most people carry it to their graves without ever knowing its name. Now you know its name. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and ask yourself, the version of you 5 years from now, the one who made it, what did they decide to believe today?